From babies being born as shapes, to vampires keeping humans in plantations. From genetically modified mermaid soldiers, to a tree possessing a human. This is the best American science fiction and fantasy of 2015. Hello, if you've been here before, welcome back. If not, hi. My name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. This is the first video of a series that I'm doing, which is reviewing anthologies, short story collections, short story books, etc. Because I absolutely adore short stories, anthologies, and such, and so I wanted to talk about them. In this series of anthology reviews, I will take an anthology or collection and talk about the stories within it and give my opinions about them. I will be covering the 2015 volume of the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy series. This one right here. Put it in my shelf. You can't see it from this angle. Let's put you over here. There we go. The Best American series is a huge collection of different types of books, and they're all like collections of short fiction and nonfiction, actually. As you'll see, I have at the very back here, the Best American series. First, best and best-selling, the Best American series is the premier annual showcase for the country's finest short fiction and nonfiction. Each volume's series editor selects notable works from hundreds of periodicals. A special guest editor, a leading writer in the field, then chooses the best 20 or so pieces to publish. This unique system has made the Best American series the most respected and most popular of its kind. Look for these best-selling titles in the Best American series. So it lists a bunch of them, which is Best American Comics, Best American Essays, Best American Infographics, Mystery Stories, Non-Required Reading, Science and Nature Writing, Science Fiction and Fantasy, Short Stories, Sports Writing, and Travel Writing. So I started reading this series when I had to read the 2020 volume. Let me put you over here. Do not fall. When I read the 2020 volume in school, and I absolutely adored it, and I had wanted to read the 2019 volume prior because it was guest edited by an author that we will talk about, which is a 2019 one over here. I have them all over here so I can flip back and forth between them. And since then, I've also read the 2022 volume and the 2023 volume. Somehow I missed the 2021 volume, but that will be fixed. And so I absolutely adored these four, 19, 20, 22, 23, and I will reference them a lot in this video. And I wanted to talk about them, and I decided to start from the very beginning of the series, which starts with 2015. And then I also have 2016. Can you see it from this angle? Oh, you can't see it. Not yet. I want to do this video series talking about the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy series, starting from the very beginning and going upwards, eventually hitting the 19, 20, etc. volumes, because they're all amazing, and I don't want to just skip around, you know what I mean? So, we're starting with this one. This video series, I would say, is slightly different than my Books That Have Changed Me series, which I'm working on the next installment. If you've been here before, you know which one I'm talking about. But I would say that this series, video series, is a lot less intensive than that, and it's less intensive than annotating for those books, which I have the notebooks right here too as well. If you remember what these were. Ooh. And I would say that this series is less intensive, but writing this was really fun, but also took a lot. So we'll see how this goes. So the science fiction and fantasy, I don't know how to say it, sub-series, strain, branch, the science fiction and fantasy branch of the Best American series is edited by John Joseph Adams. All of the books are edited by John Joseph Adams, and each volume is a different guest editor. Adams' credentials are such. So this is what he writes in the foreword. I'm new here, so let me introduce myself. I'm John Joseph Adams. I first started working in the science fiction and fantasy field in 2001 when I got a job as an editorial assistant at one of the genre's leading magazines, the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, founded in 1949, publisher of my all-time favorite story, Flowers for Algernon. In 2008, I published my first anthology, Wastelands, and since then I've published more than 20 anthologies, launched 2 magazines, Lightspeed and Nightmare, Co-funded Wired.com's The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast, and have been nominated for, or edited stories nominated for, numerous awards and honors, including the World Fantasy, Hugo, and Nebula Awards. All of which led to my being selected to serve as a series editor of the best American science fiction and fantasy. John Joseph Adams. Oh, so cool. So what Adams does is he collects 80 stories published in nationally distributed American or Canadian publications between January and December of the year prior to the volume that is being released. He chooses 40 fantasy and 40 science fiction stories and brings in the guest editor to choose the top 10 of each, thus collecting the 20 stories in each volume, 10 science fiction, 10 fantasy. The guest editor reads these stories blindly, with no bylines attached to them, nor any information about where they originally appeared or who wrote them. Of the 80 stories, 60 are not chosen. Those are listed in the back of each volume as other notable science fiction and fantasy stories as honorable mentions. The 2015 volume, the first of its series, is guest edited by Joe Hill, who is notable for his books Heart-Shaped Box, Nosferatu, which you've probably seen it. It's the book with the I'll pull it up here. It's the book with the license plate, Nosferatu, and Horns, which was also adapted into a movie of the same name starring Daniel Radcliffe. I read and watched both. The stories chosen within were published between January 2014 and December 2014. Each volume in the series has a foreword written by Adams that introduces the guest editor, gives a basic selection criteria and the process of this selection, a summation of the past year, overviews of which anthologies, collections, and periodicals were featured, general acknowledgments as well, and as in each volume, the guest editor also leaves an introduction. These introductions by the guest editor may give slight teasers for the stories within, and also are a great look into what the guest editor thinks about science fiction and fantasy, their views on it, and sort of like why they chose specific stories for a specific reason, or just in general, how they view science fiction. And I really do enjoy the introductions. I used to not, like, the first few that I read, I didn't read the introductions, but after I got to like a handful of them, I was like, actually, these introductions are really nice, and feel really nice as a reader to have someone talking about science fiction and fantasy in such amazing terms. And so I highly recommend reading both the foreword by John Joseph Adams and whatever introduction or whoever the guest editor's introduction, read that as well. So what I want to do with this video and with this series in general is to look at each anthology or collection and basically rank their stories. Of course, this is just my opinion, and my thoughts may differ from yours, and I'd love to hear how they do, how my opinions differ, that's what I mean. I judge these stories by 5 parameters, according to how much I like them, how well they're implemented, or both, because they can differ. And these 5 parameters are setting, character, speculative, plot, and style. Most are self-explanatory. Setting being where the story takes place, characters being the characters within the story. Speculative is the element of science fiction or fantasy present. Plot is the progression of the story, and style is the technical writing and the format of the story if it deviates in some way or does something really interesting in its writing. These parameters I rank from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being utter dislike and discontent with how they were implemented, or I just don't like it at all, and 10 being amazing, and I love this aspect. It is perfect, and I would not change anything about it. Generally, 5 will be the baseline, because honestly, it's very rare that I wholly dislike something, especially because, hey, these stories were published twice, and I can't really judge them too harshly, because people said, hey, this is good enough to be here. And so, obviously, these are my own opinions. And so I will take in mind, hey, other people judge this better than I did. I just have to be truthful with my thoughts. But either way, yeah, at baseline, it's a 5 if I just don't really care for it. If I don't like it, then it goes a little bit lower than 5. I've never, like, in all of these, I don't think I've ever rated it at like a 1. I tend to like stuff. And so, generally, things will be at a 5 at the lowest, maybe a little lower if I generally do not enjoy some things or don't think they were well implemented. Does that skew some things? Maybe. But I'm having fun. I'm having fun reading these stories. After I've scored each parameter, I average that score, and that average is the score that that story has. And I've used that to basically rank them. So I will briefly discuss the stories within what I did or did not like, going from the stories I liked least to the stories that I like the most. And I'll go further in depth with some of the stories that I like the most. Maybe go off on tangents, but who knows. I hope to give a good and thorough overview of each volume. And honestly, I just want to have fun talking about these stories. Even the stories that I didn't quite enjoy, there's something to enjoy about them. And I just would love to talk about all of these short stories that I've read and to highlight the authors as well. And so, without further ado, we begin. Number 20, title omitted. Author, That Man. Genre, fantasy. Original publication in Rogues. Rating, setting 6, character 6, speculative 5, plot 3, style 5. Average rating 5 out of 10, position 10. I really wanted to start this series with the first book and go upwards. Unfortunately, in this time and age, many prominent authors betray their readers with their actions in real life. Looking at you, Joanne. So we have to start this series of videos with an anthology that includes disgraced author Neil Gaiman, who's recently been in the news for suing Caroline Wallner for breaking an NDA when she accused him of sexual misconduct. He's not trying to combat that. He is suing because she broke the NDA. I will not discuss his story, nor say its title. You saw the scores. I think that my scores were biased because of my prior knowledge of him. I hope to not encounter any other authors like him in this series in the future. I know that at least in the 1920, 22, 23 volumes, all the authors are still well perceived. There is a Gaiman story in the 2016 one, so that's going to be another omitted story. It also sucks that he's the midpoint of this anthology. So I'll take this time to explain my thoughts about the edit of this book. And so this is off script a bit because I didn't write this down. But so I think, a collection of 20 stories, the edit of which story is placed where and when is really important. So the first story, the midpoint, and the last story are really important. They're benchmarks. And then the stories in between, the quarter stories, 5 and 15, are really important as well. And the stories in between each, transitionary stories, have an important use as well. And so each of those positions has a specific use, in my opinion, and the specific order chosen is really important to the enjoyment. And I will discuss how that affects some stories. It honestly didn't really affect the scoring, but it affects how I think about the overall volume, in which order each story was presented. And each story's position has a different use and a different impact, and I'll talk about that when it crops up. So yeah, this story being the midpoint, which is a really, really important position in my opinion, sucks. Moving on. Number 19, I Can See Right Through You by Kelly Link. Genre fantasy, original publication in McSweeney's Quarterly Concern. Ratings, setting 6, character 5, speculative 3, plot 5, style 6, average rating 5 out of 10, position 16. I want to maintain that a low rank here is simply my own opinion and does not reflect at all on the author's talent and work. I've read Kelly Link's Skinder's Veil in the 2022 volume, and spoilers, it's amazing. It's one of my top 10, maybe top 7 of that volume. So I will reserve further judgment of Link when I read more of her stuff. Also, I forgot to say it in my intro, spoilers, I guess, if you are worried about spoilers for all of these stories. That being said, I did not quite enjoy this story for a fantasy science fiction anthology. It's about Will and Meggie, who are aging movie stars who starred in a dark romance that made Will famous as a demon lover character and started their tumultuous relationship with each other and also the public. Maggie has been filming a ghost hunting show and is recording an episode in an abandoned nudist colony about a missing nudist community. They just disappeared. Will visits her after a sex tape is leaked onto the internet, showing that he's cheating on his current wife, Fawn. He's having an affair. And when he goes visits Maggie, he meets her current lover, Ryan. In the end, Maggie disappears, and no one else except for Will remembers Ryan, her lover, suggesting a supernatural element. Suggesting, which I'm using with asterisks and quotation marks and grains of salt. So I did really enjoy some of the technical aspects of the writing. It's in limited third-person narration, and the narration refers to him as demon lover only. He never calls himself Will, or like, because it's limited, it's in his mind, but it's third person. You know what I mean. He's only ever referred to as demon lover. And that shows how disconnected he's become from his own life. And I like that. And I also like how the story is written entirely within the present tense. And there are moments where Will thinks about the past that are marked by a parentheses year, close parentheses, that allow them to be written in present tense. And so moments in the past are written in present tense, but still communicated to us that it is in the past. I feel like the need to make everything in present tense is an interesting goal, but I'm not wholly sure what that goal is. Besides that, all the television crew in the story decides to go nude in the hopes to attract the missing nudist community ghosts, which is a fun visual, I will say at least. The big thing that I didn't meld with in this story is that there really weren't that many speculative elements. It felt, for the most part, like a character study of the demon lover with small mentions of ghosts between, but they're not really that well connected. When Maggie disappears and Will is the prime suspect, no one will believe him about Ryan, but there's also no clues alluding to Ryan not actually being real. There's a detail that I do kind of like, that Maggie never talked to him, but a good red herring had been set up prior that she doesn't pay attention to her lovers in public. There was a party that he thought about. She didn't pay attention to her lover there, and so that makes her not talking to him in the present makes sense. But because of that, there's confusion here. Is that a red herring or is that a clue? I don't really know. Overall, it didn't feel like this story should have been included alongside other more fantastical stories. The story feels too pared down compared to others. It is in position 15, which is a quarter position, and this lack of speculative elements jumps out here, especially coming off of prior stories. But I would also say maybe the lack of speculative elements kind of is a palate cleanser in a way, but I still think there needed to be more. The setting of the abandoned nudist colony plus the nude TV crew adds a certain distinct texture to the anthology that we haven't got before, which I appreciate, along with like really cool, smart writing that I can't really wrap my head around why, but it's still kind of cool. However, I don't feel like it's executing the fantastical supernatural elements as it should, or at least how I'd like it to. Also, basic straight men bore me. Get some therapy. Number 18, The Empties by Jess Row. Genre, science fiction, original publication, The New Yorker. Rating, setting 7, characters 5, speculative 8, plot 6, style 4, average rating 6 out of 10, position 17. I think logically this story is only marginally better than I Can See You Right Through You, but I have stronger emotions for Link's story, both negative and positive, than this one. I'm more ambivalent / negative about this story, but the fact that there's already more speculative elements present, to me, sets it just above. It's about a small community working together in the post-apocalypse, and the main character, a woman who remains unnamed, begins writing down the personal histories of the town before the apocalypse. Then a stranger appears and warns about a militant group that would threaten their livelihood. The two biggest marks for me is that it doesn't really feel that special, and the writing style is very difficult. I also forgot to mention, at the very end of the book, there is contributor notes, where it gives a little description of the author's credentials, I guess, and also their input into the story. which I do enjoy reading them because it gives really cool insight as to the author's intent and want for the story. And I really like reading the contributor notes for the stories that I love. So check those out as well if you read these. They're really important. In the contributor notes, Row had said that he wanted to write a post-apocalyptic story that was more realism than the usual post-apocalyptic stories, which I feel is a valid want, but not an exciting one to read. I will agree that it has some well-written realism about the things people did to survive and the minutiae of the main character's day-to-day. However, the realism of their survival and the want of the main character to document their history doesn't make this story stand out that much. It's somewhat bland to me compared to other post-apocalyptic stories. Just because I read it recently, it reminded me of the last section of David Mitchell's The Bone Clocks. I have all the books that I'm referencing right off the screen here. In The Bone Clocks, the main character, Holly, lives in a near post-apocalypse at the end of the section. It's only like 40 pages long. And because I had enough time to live with Holly before this section, it's a combination of the care that I have for her, the setting that she was in, because she's in an isolated community in Ireland, and her relationship with other characters that adds flavor to the usual post-apocalyptic story, as well as giving some world building, or I guess world destroying building information. That's also really fun. The Empties also gives some interesting world destruction building, world building destruction, etc. But I feel like it's not expounded on. I don't really care for it. But yeah, in this story, the post-apocalypse was more interesting than what I got from the Empties, unfortunately. At the end of this video, I'll show how I have these set up. I don't want to mess up my camera. So separate than that, I didn't really like the writing style. It's dense, with admittedly great description, but it's really busy. It's set in limited third-person POV, again, same as I Can See Right Through You. However, limited third-person POV is really good. I will not hear anything about it. POVs work for different stories. Anyways, this dense writing feels even more sluggish because there's so much focus on the small details. The story also doesn't use quotation marks to denote dialogue, which is a style of writing that I like and have written in and have read in. But here, it makes moments a bit confusing and jarring, especially when it dips into the first-person POV of dialogue, because we have third person going, and then all of a sudden we have like first person that we're supposed to understand is dialogue, but at times the format of the book in of itself confuses that for me. I think that the hyper-realistic writing mixed with lack of dialogue markers makes the writing feel monotone, and I don't like that. The overall impact for the story for me is minimal. There are other more noteworthy post-apocalyptic stories in other volumes, and this one simply does not pop for me, and it's just not memorable, unfortunately. At position 16, coming right off of the Demon Lover's whole deal, the speculative elements add some positive points for me, but combined with the dense writing and boring post-apocalypse, both stories cause a dip in enjoyment for me. This is where I'm talking about the edit of the story, having I Can See Right Through You and Empties come right off of it. At this point in the story, I feel a lack of enjoyment of this book at that time. Do you see how the edit is important here? So yeah, I hope this is not the future for us. Number 17, The Bad Graft by Karen Russell. Genre fantasy, original publication in The New Yorker, rating setting 8, character 5, speculative 7, plot 5, style 5, average rating 6 out of 10, position 4. This story is a heavy swing and a miss, and I feel so bad for it. Unfortunately, the only other Karen Russell story I read was the Cloud Lake Unicorn in the 2022 volume. I'm gonna keep doing this because this is fun. And I didn't like it. It's in my bottom 5 for that volume. But I really do appreciate what was attempted here because it does have elements that would normally appeal to me. It just missed the mark. It's about Angie and Andy eloping into the Mojave Desert, and they sightsee the famous Joshua Tree National Park. After an accidental prick, the Joshua Tree attempts to possess Angie, causing her and the tree emotional distress and a struggle to understand what's happening to them. This story combines biology, and weird fantasy, which I enjoy a lot. I like the moments where the tree thinks and then realizes that it's thinking and knows that it should not be thinking. That's really cool. Plant biology is so strange by itself. I should know. I have a bachelor's in biology. Didn't do anything with that, but plant biology is so strange. And you can do so much with the unknowability of plants when you bring in fantasy and sci-fi elements. I'm reminded of The Ruins by Scott Smith. Watch the movie as well. Movie was good. Book was separate good. I think I like the movie more. But yeah, this was the strangling vines that chase you. Horrifying. And also Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. Annihilation. Ignore that yelp. I just thought this all fell. Authority and Acceptance. I loved these stories, these books. The biological aspect is really weird. Science fiction. I would say Ruins is like fantasy, but it's horror, obviously. But yes, those stories have really cool biology. But to me, Bad Graft has a treatment of the tree that is newer and different. So for those of you who don't know, a graft is when a piece of a plant is removed from one plant and attached to another in an attempt to combine both, which happens to Angie. The tree attempts to possess her, and the conflict between them is so well written. The alien feeling of the tree versus the human instincts of Angie as they fight for dominance. It's also really cool that Angie doesn't know that she's fighting it, and the tree cannot comprehend conflict and just attempts to grow. Angie is able to defeat the tree, which itself is not disappointing. I would have liked to see the tree win. I think that's gruesome and fun. But it's the way that she does it that brings this story real down for me. This is where the character aspect of the story intersects, which is overall my least favorite element of this story. Angie and Andy are the usual white heterosexual couple who do what they want because they can, deciding to elope and play at independence despite them being 26 and 22 respectively. I just found myself mostly annoyed at their flippant romance and attempts to run away from their lives, and it didn't take me out of the story. I just did not enjoy reading that. Their relationship suffers when the tree begins winning, and in an attempt to mend their relationship, Andy takes Angie to a hike near the original Joshua tree. And before this, the story had dived briefly into other bad grafts that have happened in the past with other people and the consequences of that, ranging from murder to suicide to just disappearing. And so we're expecting, hey, Angie's going to do something bad to him. And she almost does, because she has a knife somehow, and she almost stabs him. But before that, he starts talking about when they first met, and it's nostalgia that defeats the tree. Angie feels nostalgia, and that emotion is too powerful for the tree. And that's how she wins. The overall tone of the story is dark humor, and the ridiculous, strange conflict between the tree and Angie fits right into it. But nostalgia beating the tree feels more ironic than dark humor, especially nowadays, of how much nostalgia is being used to just earn money without care for the art. And so I just have a general personal dislike about the feeling of nostalgia being used in stories to appeal to people. And so it was just like, okay, I guess. I'm not saying that having Angie murder Andy is the better ending. I would have preferred that, but it's not the better ending. But the structure of the story, because it's separated into sections of the graft, the title of the story, and the buildup of the conflict don't pay off in this ending. A good payoff for me would be something gory, something funny that would be similar to the dark tone that has been set up before. But nostalgia just feels... it feels hipster. If that's the right way to say it, I just enjoy it. Going into the edit of the book, these anthologies don't have to alternate between science fiction and fantasy throughout. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the stories. But they do tend to have the first 4 stories being 2 fantasy and 2 science fiction. I see these stories as introductory stories as they establish the feel of the anthology moving forward. So they are important to me. And the Bad Graft in position 4 is an okay position, I'd say, as the speculative elements are smart, but the story and the characters bring it down for me. It definitely does set a really nice tone for the anthology, along with the other three stories in the first 4 that we get. Also, basic straight men bore me. Get some therapy. Number 16, We Are the Cloud by Sam J. Miller. Genre, science fiction, original publication in Lightspeed magazine. Rating, setting 8, character 7, speculative 5, plot 5, style 6. Average rating, 6.2 out of 10, position 13. I have a contentious, one-sided relationship with Sam J. Miller. He always writes queer stories, which I enjoy, obviously. Hello. And his short stories in these anthologies have been hits and misses. I've read like 3 or 4. I've also read his novel, The Art of Starving, which I did not enjoy at all. And The Blade Between, which disappointed me but was fine. I wanted more. And this story is also contentious. In this world, data companies use human brains as data processors, so they pay people, usually poor and disenfranchised people, to have, I believe it's described as lobotomies, so there would be free riders for rich people everywhere. They put something in your brain. The main character, Sorrow, lives in foster care and meets Case, whom he falls in love with, and Case convinces him to film gay porn and runs away with the money after they get paid. Sorrow, who has this port in his brain, continues filming porn and uses his special grasp of the cloud and data to disrupt data flow and begin a revolution. This story comments on and critiques systems of class and power within the United States and how inner city people are disenfranchised and oppressed by these power systems. Sorrow's career of gay porn and how other people are drawn into this career because of their circumstances was unexpected, I would say, but not unwelcomed. And it does add a different viewpoint and topic to this anthology, a sort of different texture similar to the Nudist Colony in I Can See Right Through You. To me, the speculative element of the ports in the brain adds too much confusion. People's brains are used to process data, and Sorrow has a special knack to manipulate the data, but the actual real-life science of data processing and the cloud is too nebulous for me to understand what it's trying to say. This, I feel, is more of a me problem, as I do not have the frame of reference. Because of this, I cannot differentiate between what is science fiction and what is actually real, and thus I find it hard to understand the commentary that is being discussed. I can understand lower-class people being oppressed by companies, low bar, but what is being done to them is confusing to me, again, because I lack the frame of context, frame of reference. The social commentary elements are still there, and at times supersedes the sci-fi stuff, which I'm glad about. Sorrow is a mixed-race Puerto Rican put in the foster system when his single mother was caught using heroin. The foster system, high police presence in the Bronx, and racial tensions are conflicts Sorrow faces and deals with throughout, along with his internal conflict of his sexuality, parentheses, learning to accept himself, close parentheses, doing gay porn, close parentheses, and his speech impediment that contrasts with his large stature. He's described as this large guy. His named Sorrow. Case says he's named Sorrow because he's a big dino, but it's in reality because his mother called him Taro because he liked dinosaurs when he was younger. There are moments throughout where I can understand Sorrow toying with a power that he shouldn't have to manipulate the cloud, thus we are the cloud, but like I said, I can't quite understand what the effect is. In the end, he learned how to manipulate that technology using other people's ports and connecting to the cloud, which begins a revolution, but the story ends before it can begin. It's an interesting decision to show Sorrow's beginning and using his foray into gay porn to bolster his confidence, which is fun. But I feel like the more interesting story is seeing the aftermath of his revolution. Miller frustrates me because his themes are poignant and topical, but his work I don't quite enjoy as much. Like Link, I reserve judgment until I've read more of his stuff, but honestly, at this point, I'm not really looking forward to it. I want to read Blackfish City because that sounds interesting, and every time that I try to get my hands on it, I can't. So we'll see. At least I know that in any of his stories, there will be men kissing men and women kissing women, and that's enough for me. At position 13, it's not a very interesting position because it's a transitory position. It's a bridge between the midpoint and the third quarter. It's sandwiched, in my opinion, by two pretty good stories. And so here in 13, We Are the Cloud, it's fine putting it here. It's fine. I want that twink obliterated. Number 15. A Guide to the Fruits of Hawaii by Alaya Dawn Johnson. Genre fantasy, original publication in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Rating, setting 8, character 5, speculative 7, plot 6, style 5. Average rating, 6.2 out of 10. Position, 5. This story is very original while still following some traditions in fantasy stories. I enjoy these anthologies a lot because you get so many different points of view and new perspectives, and this one is the first in this anthology that I can say that I was surprised about, especially in its position. It's about what would happen if a war was fought and lost between humans and vampires, with vampires being the victors. And it features Key, who works as an overseer in a plantation in Hawaii that holds humans for vampires to drink blood from. She's transferred to a higher-end compound by Tetsuo, a vampire and her former lover/slaver, and has to deal with the young people kept in that luxury vacation spot set in Hawaii, thus Le Fruits. There is also, one of the characters reads a book called The Guide to the Fruits of Hawaii. In that compound, a girl had recently killed herself, and Key has to find out why. There's a lot of interesting concepts and themes explored here. There's a critique of corporations and governments exploiting labor and treating their workers as cattle. Almost all the humans are fixed with a shunt on their arm that allows for easy access to their blood, but with a stopper that prevents them from being drained. There's also innovative world building, as the post-war, post-apocalypse setting of the vampire government and vampire bureaucracy is really cool. The bureaucracy hangs over Key's future, and that's a really interesting tertiary antagonist, I would say. The vampire lore presented here is also a little bit different. It's the usual vampire lore with something added on. They can transform someone into a vampire. In the story, it's called transmuting someone. And they can only do that if they have not drunk blood from that human. And there's commentary on sex work, as some vampires prefer humans to be engaging in sexual acts to have their blood taste better. These ideas, concepts, themes all mix well in the inciting incident. Penelope, the girl who had killed herself, was revealed to be murdered by another human, Rachel, in that compound, when Penelope was going to reveal Rachel's pregnancy. Rachel didn't want to be sent to a mommy farm, which is where pregnant humans are sent by vampires to basically incubate their baby to be used as food, cattle, livestock for the vampires. So Rachel killed Penelope for that story not to get out. However, while these interesting ideas and more are really well written, the central conflict is a dramatic human one, with a strange romance story between Key and Tetsuo. Early in the war, Key had found a wounded Tetsuo, who was then a soldier in the war, and spared his life, and he promised to spare her if/when the vampires win the war, and they did, and he kept this promise. Key, after beginning to work for the vampires, struggles with her attraction towards Tetsuo and her frustration that he's not drunk from her, which she thinks should cement their relationship. She also didn't know about the limitation of transmuting, as he'd purposely not drunk her blood so that he could transmute her later once he got approval from the vampire higher-ups, the vampire bureaucracy. Yeah. I didn't enjoy this dynamic. It's well written, it's complicated, it's unequal and toxic, and I would say fun to read. However, I don't personally enjoy this type of relationship. I do enjoy that in the end of the story, when Key is transmuted by Tetsuo, she feels both amazing at the change, but also fear and disgust, wishing that she'd killed Tetsuo when they first met. That was really cool. This interpersonal relationship overshadows most of the narration of the story, as Key almost always thinks about Tetsuo and her relationship to him. And while they're not as annoying as, say, Angie and Andy in Bad Graft, this still makes me dislike her. Plus, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to sympathize with the position or pity her naivety. I don't know if I'm supposed to pity her because she's being naive. And that's my biggest issue with this, because it's pretty vague in how I'm supposed to think about her. Because there are stories that allow you to come to your own conclusion about how this character is acting, if this is right conclusion or not, and has some clues as to what the author thinks, or what the characters might think, or what the moral thought is. It doesn't appear here, and I'm confused about if I should like her or not. If she's made to be unlikable, she's still a little too likable, and vice versa. So it's like, I don't know. The world building and concept is interesting, but come on, girl, have some more self-respect. At position 5, the first quarter. It's a good transition into the whole story because of the interesting world building elements, but I didn't enjoy the main character's conflict as much. This time, I don't support a women's wrongs. Number 14, Ogres of East Africa by Sofia Samatar. Genre fantasy, original publication in Long Hidden. Ratings, setting 6, character 5, speculative 8, plot 5, style 7. Average rating 6.2 out of 10, position 7. Sofia Samatar has 2 stories represented here, so I'll split what I have to say between the 2 entries. It's definitely a feat to have 2 stories in this anthology when it's chosen blindly, especially with them being 2 different genres, which shows amazing versatility. You're showing versatility to the judges. In this story, Alibi is hired by an unnamed employer to document the ogres in East Africa, and he talks with an informant named Mary to get the information. She helps him realize the wrong ways of his employer, and Alibi and the other workers lead the employer to a trap, and they become ogres as well. The biggest pull of the story is the format, with Alibi writing the names of ogres, numbering them, and giving a description, followed by what feels like footnotes or margin notes that tell the larger story. So you'll see here, I don't know if I'm showing it correctly, but there's like brackets where it starts like the margin notes that I'm talking about, and then 1, and then it's talking about the description of it, etc. Yeah, that is fun. The ogres he writes about, their descriptions and Mary's stories are all extremely imaginative and whimsical. However, for me, I lack the cultural framework this time to know if these stories were pulling from past folklore or not, whether the stories told are historical with a fantastical twist, or Samatar's fully original ideas, especially because at the very end, when the characters become ogres themselves, that's telling me there's some sort of social, ethnic commentary that I don't quite understand. Again, same with We Are the Cloud. This is an issue with me, not the story. It's just an issue of how I interact with the story, and it affects my enjoyment of it. I didn't know what was satire and what was serious in regards to the ogres, if there is some sort of a commentary in their descriptions. And then the margin notes with Alibi and Mary add great context and further portray the conflict, with Alibi multiple times noting how the majority of the information he gets from Mary will be censored by his employer. We also learn about his employer's casual racism to the other servants of a different nationality to him. This is great commentary on colonization and historical record-keeping being changed by the oppressive group. Samatar says in the contributor's notes that she had found a very similar catalog in real life with very similar ethnically charged writing, racially charged writing. So there's really cool irony here, because the information that Alibi learns that the employer does not want in the catalog is used against him, as Alibi and the other workers unite to survive entering into a forest because they have knowledge that the employer doesn't want, thus doesn't have, to disguise themselves as ogres basically when they enter into an ogre forest, thus allowing themselves to survive and allowing for the unnamed employer to be killed by other ogres. So there have been some amazing stories that break or change form, challenge normal form writing, and this is one of them, but I think that it relies too much on the prose in the margin notes and doesn't push the break of form as much as it should. I compare it to a different story later in this anthology, and to Nivedita Sen's 10 excerpts from an annotated bibliography on the cannibal women of Ratnabar Island. from the 2020 version. I'll show you the cover so you can see how actually long the title was. You see, that's how long it is, the title. And this story is only like 3 pages long. It's amazing. Both in Ogres and in 10 excerpts, there are sections/entries that give an almost contained description, but while Ogres has added margin notes, 10 excerpts doesn't. I feel that Ogres doesn't take full advantage of the break in form, as I could ignore the catalogs and still get 80% of the story. It doesn't feel like the entries of the Ogres themselves does much for the plot of the story, except give added context. Most of the Ogres are further detailed in the margins anyways. But then again, also, why am I still here? Then again, that idea also clashes with the idea of the irony of the information being hidden and stuff like that. And so it's just, there's things that are conflicting within me when I'm reading this story. Overall, I did enjoy Ogres of East Africa, but I was unfamiliar with ogre folklore in general, so it was difficult for me to fully immerse myself. I also think that the break in form doesn't reach its full potential. Still, in Position 7, a transition piece, a break of form is very welcome, and I do like the story of Alibi and Mary in the margin notes, and so, yeah. Down with the bourgeoisie. Number 13, How to Get Back to the Forest by Sofia Samatar. Genre, science fiction. Original publication in Lightspeed magazine. Rating, setting 7, character 5, speculative 7, plot 6, style 6. Average rating, 6.2 out of 10. Position 1. Like I said, Sofia Samatar has a great perspective and has been included many times in these anthologies. I loved her story, Hard Mary, in the 2019 volume, and was mesmerized by readings in the Slantwise Science in the 2023 volume. Hard Mary and Slantwise Science were just amazing. And I know that she has a story in the 2016 volume. So amazing, great. I love you, Sofia Samatar. So because of Hard Mary, because of Slantwise, because of Ogres, because of Forest, I'm looking forward to all of the short stories that she will be have written in these volumes, because I know that she will appear many a times in these volumes. In this story, Tisha is remembering her days in camp, capital C camp, where children are sent in this alternate future to be taught life skills, capital L, capital S, life skills, and be prepared for a specific job while also being separated from their families. A girl in that camp, C, finds out that the government implants bugs into people to control their emotions. And C shows the other girls how to remove them by throwing up. As an adult, Tisha remembers the lessons and realizes the wrongness of her society. I get it. Like, I don't get it, because the information is just a bit too subtle for me to understand. Some ideas are too muddled and confusing for me to grasp, but I get it. Children are separated from their parents at very young ages and allowed to keep objects called mother or father figures, capital M, capital F figures, which shows how the government is hiding their indoctrination and control. The bugs secretly implanted to control people's emotions, making them feel better, a secret form of control. Community is pushed in very unhealthy ways, and people report on each other about illnesses, about sicknesses, a surveillance state being shown. There's forced optimism of their reality, with Tisha repeatedly saying camp was the best thing ever, and almost like a flinch, capital C camp, almost like a flinch, and a way to convince herself, until eventually realizing camp wasn't fun. Camp was a fucking factory. But beyond just control, I don't see what the dystopia is. But I do, especially with the bugs being implanted into people. Setting the majority of the story within the limited viewpoint of a group of girls is a great way to immerse us into this wrong culture without showing us how wrong it is. There's an innate feeling of wrongness in their camp, in their lessons of how adults treat them. But the dystopia itself is too vague for me to grasp. It also adds and detracts that some of the treatment of the girls feels very realistic to how people treat women and girls, especially young girls. And so, commentary there as well. Like, hey, dystopia kind of feels very similar to the real life. So there's that. But the overall system I don't know what it is. The way it's written, Tisha is writing in a notebook, and it makes it feel like she's trying to make sense of her mix of emotions and memories, and thus we, the audience, eventually reach the same conclusion she does at the same time. It also reminds me of Anil Menon's The Robots of Eden in the 2020 volume. This one. I'm not pulling it out again. Where people choose to be enhanced, capital E enhanced, with a brain, capital B brain, that helps regulate their emotions to help ease suffering and human interactions. Here in Forest, it's involuntary, and it's a great reciprocal view to this type of technology that helps you modulate your emotions. One's voluntary, one's involuntary. It's a tightly written story, with C being the most interesting and important character that disappears midway through. Like, actually disappears. She commits too many infractions in capital C camp, and she's taken away. But then she haunts Tisha's mind and the narrative after the fact, which was really fun to read. I don't really have strong emotions about it because it's telling a story that is not for me. Samatar says that she wrote this as a feminist story about the connection between women in a state of sickness and defiance. Similarly to Ogres and We Are the Cloud, I simply do not have the gender framework to fully grasp the commentary here. Yet I do really enjoy having the group of girls who push against society participate in secret vomiting sessions, as it is very realistic to our current world and a great merging of realism writing with the science fiction genre. Like, you could totally see this secret vomiting session in YA coming-of-age stories. This story is sharing commentary that I haven't approached before, and I struggle to understand it, but the themes and world building are slowly and sickeningly dripped to us, which helps bridge both of these aspects for me. I think having the story where girls are vomiting a lot in position 1 is a bold decision. It's a bit risky. And if I was someone else, I may be a little turned off by this, and thus I would have stopped reading this anthology. This story may have worked better in a later position. However, it being the first story, it is a great setter of tone for the entire anthology. And if you can get through the vomiting of this story, you can get through the entire anthology. Cue the saxophone in Carly Rae Jepsen's Run Away With Me. Number 12, Each to Each by Seanan McGuire. Genre, science fiction. Original publication in Lightspeed magazine, Women Destroy Science Fiction. Rating, setting 7, characters 6, speculative 8, plot 7, style 7. Average rating, 7 out of 10, position 6. I've read Seanan McGuire's What Everyone Knows in the 2019 volume, and it was really good. And I honestly didn't really know that when I wrote this script. I was like, has this author been featured before? And she has. And I'm like, my God, I remember this story, and I love that story, and it was really great to learn that as I was writing this script. Both of them are really similar in some thematic ways, and I do enjoy that. And so I know that I'm going to keep track of her when I keep reading these anthologies. Each to Each is about a soldier in the US Army in an alternate future where the water levels have risen and a large group of women are genetically modified to be able to serve their country underwater. The main character eventually meets a group of free mermaids who have defected from many different governments and live freely underwater, and she herself defects from the army. Again, beautiful descriptions of biology. I love that there are both varying degrees of modifications and different types of modifications, which bring a lot of variety and description and purpose within the story. How much has this person been changed into a mermaid, and what type of mermaid has she been turned into? The main character herself, who remains unnamed throughout, is still humanoid and has not made a decision as to which species to focus on, while others have. There's a moment where a contingent, I think is the right term here, of soldiers goes into the water, and they each have a distinct and specific role thanks to the genetic modification they have as ocean species. There's like one that glows, there's one that has really great echolocation, etc. There's great commentary here about how governments and corporations lie, as the modified soldiers outwardly believe that their modifications are reversible. The government tells them they're reversible. But they know and truly believe that the army and government will not reverse them or cannot reverse them. The leader of the defected group that the main character meets with was modified by a private island, making her into a clownfish with a promise that she would be an entertainer, and then reneged on that promise. That's when she ran away. Gender politics are explored with the US government making the mermaids seem attractive and enticing, marketable even, which makes money pour in, but also not caring about the mermaids at all after the fact. Most commanders look at them with discomfort or disgust. The dehumanization of women is perpetrated by their modifications. They themselves, the women, see these modifications as weapons, as protection, but the governments and corporations see these women as tools instead of soldiers, as monsters and mermaids instead of human beings. Honestly, it doesn't feel like much happens in this story, as on an excursion, a soldier is harmed mysteriously, which leads to the main character's patrol and her encounter with the free Mers. A lot of time is spent in exposition, descriptions of the modifications, or the main character's internal distrust of the powers that control her, as well as examples of the world building. I think everything balances out really well, so it's not overly one or the other, and so despite it not feeling that much happens, we still get a lot of information, and it doesn't feel heavy-handed or heavy at all, which is good. The title, Each to Each, first of all, don't like that title. But also I can't say because I suck at naming things, at titling, writing. I suck at that. But yes, Each to Each really refers to the mermaids choosing to separate themselves from humans at the same time that humans push them away while also not letting them be separate. It's almost a queer theme where people carve out their own space of safety and have to fight against forces that want to both separate themselves from the queer culture, here mermaids, while also seeking to oppress it. This gives the main character's decision to defect a sense of hope and freedom from the mistreatment of the army. Having armies genetically modify or enhance their soldiers to the extent of dehumanization or othering them is a popular science fiction trope. Most recently, I read in the First Sister trilogy. I have the first book here, second and third. They're kind of heavy, actually. Hold on. In this series, written by Lyndon A. Lewis, in the future where human colonies on Earth, Mars, Mercury, and Venus are at war with each other, and a lot of genetic modification and the consequences of such crop up in this series. Specifically, in Mercury and Venus, soldiers have chips that they can basically telecommunicate with each other across space, and also basic physical genetic modification. Like one of the main characters is a non-binary character that is forced to become a genetic woman by their father because their father is bad and wants to make them into a spy, and so makes them become a woman physically. Horrifying. Love that character. Also, robots. I'm getting off track. Each to Each. In position 6 is a great position after the quarter story that adds in some nautical themes. Again, some more interesting textures that adds to this anthology. Also, this may be a better feminist story than Forest, but in this household, we don't pit two queens against each other. Number 11, The Relive Box by T.C. Boyle. Genre, science fiction, original publication, The New Yorker. Rating, setting 7, character 7, speculative 8, plot 7, style 6. Average rating, 7 out of 10, position 19. This one was a hard one to read emotionally. These stories don't have to be hopeful or end positively, but this one is a real downer, but in a good way. This story commits to a sad ending, and I really like that. It's about a father, Wes, and his daughter Katie fighting over the Relive Box, a machine that lets you rewatch your own memories in perfect detail. His relationships and his life fall around him as he struggles to deal with his addiction to the past. This is one of the stories in this anthology that feel the most like a Black Mirror episode, and in fact, it's very similar to the episode The Entire History of You, written by Jesse Armstrong and directed by Brian Welsh, with the memory chip in the back of the head, and also to Ted Chiang's The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling in his anthology collection, Exhalation. All three of these which are concerned with technology that allows you to watch back moments in the past and the impact that dwelling on the past can have. Entire History of You deals with a breakup in a romantic relationship, Truth of Fact with a familial connection, and also dealing with language and learning and stuff like that as well. Relive Box does both in a different way. Wes keeps looking back at his first relationships that he's had, and Katie, who's only 15, relives moments with her mother, who's divorced Wes and moved away with her new husband. The more that Wes uses the box, the more disconnected and disinterested he is with the world. What's interesting is that the memories Wes looks back on are not amazing, nor are they totally bad. He makes mistakes, his partners make mistakes, and he moves on from them. But his current situation, a single father with a teenage daughter, in comparison, feels less heightened than his past, and so he has to relive the past. And it does begin to be almost like a drug for some people, for most people, which is not explored in Exhalation, Truth of Fact, Truth of Feeling, and the Entire History of You. They don't deal with that aspect, but here it's like a drug addiction. There's subtle moments where we see other people around Wes also begin to lose themselves and become disconnected from reality. Wes seems to lose himself in his memories, losing hours of sleep to watch his own past. Katie, who's a child, also stops spending time with people her own age, trying to heal her grief of the separation of her mother. Near the end of the story, as Wes gets more and more disheartened, he begins going to random memories, at one point reliving how it felt to be in his mother's womb, which is nothingness, which is whoa, and then being birthed, which was a brief, disturbing moment with a lot of detail. At the very end, Katie pulls Wes out from these memories, and she asks him if he's there, and he doesn't recognize her. So entrenched in his past that he doesn't want to comprehend his present. And then it just ends unceremoniously. At position 19, it's a great story that helps lead us towards an end, a moment of sadness and regret before the last story to send us off. This story makes me pity the characters and the world, but it wants us to. And I like that it wants us to. But damn, it's depressing. Also, basic straight men bore me. Get some therapy. Number 10. Help Me Follow My Sister into the Land of the Dead by Carmen Maria Machado. Genre fantasy. Original publication in Help Fund My Robot Army and Other Improbable Crowdfunding Projects. Rating, setting 7, character 8, speculative 8, plot 5, style 9. Average rating 7.4 out of 10, position 2. I adore Carmen Maria Machado. I read her Body and Other Parties. I read her story, Her Body and Other Parties. Loved this short story collection. This will be featured in a future short story anthology review. And also her memoir, In the Dream House. I liked it as well. Didn't like it as much as in Her Body and Other Parties, In the Dream House. Nonfiction, written very, very well though. I'm just not a nonfiction guy. She also edited the 2019 volume, which is what I was alluding to in terms of it being edited by an amazing author. This is Carmen Maria Machado, edited this story. I wanted to read this anthology after reading Her Body and Other Parties, but before reading the 2020 volume for school and finding out that this is a continual series, I'm like, oh, okay, I need to read the rest of them because of Carmen Maria Machado, and I guess the 2020 volume. Oh, this is the midpoint. We've reached the midpoint of this anthology. If you have gotten to this part, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed yourself so far, and I hope you continue. This story is funded like a GoFundMe/Kickstarter about Ursula, who is trying to go into the land of the dead to follow her sister, who's there. And she thinks her sister Olive just walked into the land of the dead and wants to tell her about the death of her parents. It's formatted like this. This story is nearly perfect, especially because it's bolstered by my positive bias of Carmen Maria Machado. Like Ogres, it breaks the form and makes a story out of a GoFundMe page, but is more successful than Ogres in breaking the form. My favorite part is the FAQ section, frequently asked questions. Shout out to the question, how did your parents die? When Ursula begins by mentioning fatal car recalls, and then flips it on its head and says she wishes that it was a fatal car recall, that her parents were killed by a car crash. But in reality, it was a murder-suicide committed by her father. There's a lot of humor and character packed into these small sections, and I was so on board. There's a cool section where Ursula lays out different pledge tiers, which shows how many people have already pledged money, grounding this story further in the world. There's hints at Ursula's home life, going through a divorce, her history with Olive, as well her sister, showing a rocky relationship. A lot is set up in great, subtle ways that make the break in the form flow easy and unobtrusive. I really like what Machado says in the contributor notes at the end of the book. I have always been a fan of formal conceits and constraints, fictional artifacts, and stories that look like other things. There's something deeply satisfying about throwing up obstacles in my own path and having to climb over them. The result is often something unclassifiable, beautiful, or strange. I also like how original it feels. I enjoy the fantasy aspect of Ursula needing money to get the materials to create a portal, and once she's in the land of the dead, the descriptions are limited but vivid. There's Hispanic influence here as well, which I enjoy a lot from Machado's work, being a Latino myself. Where the story begins to lose me is the update section. These updates she gives delivers the ending of the story and returns to a more epistolary form of writing than it was before. Epistolary being like letters being sent. And it sort of felt like that, but we return to a more standard type of writing. The form shifts into more traditional storytelling, and it disappointed me in this regard. However, after the updates, it returns to the format of the GoFundMe page, which I was glad to. Within the FAQ questions, Ursula says that she found the bodies of her parents, having been invited to dinner, and Olive had backed out. She texted her saying she wasn't coming. As the story progressed, we learned that in reality, Olive was present at the murder-suicide, wanting to surprise Ursula, and was killed by her father. This reveal is fine, not my favorite, and makes Ursula feel more impulsive than how she describes her own sister. She talks a lot about how her sister's a party animal, that she just waltzed into the land of the dead without thinking about anything. But like Ursula, you kind of did the same thing, and I don't feel like this story pushes that moment of irony at all. I understand being distracted by grief, but it felt like too much suspension of disbelief for me. The style picks up again, as I said, in a comments section, which I really do enjoy and helps deliver a little bit more of the story. There are comments from random people who have backed Ursula, as well as comments from Olive, delivering a little bit more exposition about their childhood, and Ursula's ex-fiancé, Lucille. In the end, the story is left more or less ambiguous, as Ursula is told that she can't take Olive back to the land of the living by death herself, ? I like the ambiguity of who that woman is. It's not totally ambiguous, because the only decision that Ursula has is either to go back to the land of the living, or staying in the land of the dead, I guess dying. And I'm not really married to either side. I think both would be interesting continuities of the story, but it doesn't matter in the long run. And having Lucille's messages go unanswered, these messages are where we find out that Olive was there and her body was discovered a little later. Her messages not being answered feels more realistic than ambiguous as well. And I do like how it ended because of this, because it ends with the comment. So it feels like you reach the end of the page. This story could have been amazing, but the reveal of what actually happened to Olive, and that she wasn't a crazy party animal, and that she was actually trying to surprise his sister, I didn't really enjoy. And the shift into the update section took me out of the story. And then the story brought me back with the change into the comments, but I just did not like the update section. I think there could have been something a lot more interesting written to add this extra story, but whatever. I cannot fault Machado I cannot. I'm sorry, Queen. Still, in position 2, coming right off of Samatar's Forest, it's a great introductory story. Requiescat in pace, my guy. Number 9, Sleeper by Jo Walton. Genre, science fiction. Original publication in Tor.com. Rating, setting 6, character 8, speculative 9, plot 8, style 7. Average rating, 7.6 out of 10. Position 9. 9 for 9. This one is a personally scary and optimistic story for me. I was the most surprised when reading this story as it developed, and it speaks to me as someone who is afraid for the future. This is about Essie, an author living in the near future with an oppressive right-wing economic system, who's hired to write a biography on long-dead director Matthew Corley. This book will be sold with a simulation of Corley that Essie has created, so the readers can speak to him, and Essie talks with Corley before submitting the final edit to convince him to spread the knowledge and ideas of communism, as he was secretly a Soviet spy in the 1930s, while also being secretly gay. I don't mention that he's gay any later in the writing, so I'm mentioning here. He's gay. He's gay. This story is fun because the world Essie lives in is cyberpunk and different, and we get a moment where she's talking with a coworker, and we see a weird gender dynamic. You'd have to read it to know what I mean. Then, when Essie talks with Matthew, he comments on her distinct style, having a shaved head, cheek rings, and a hologram shirt. I have to reread it again to see if it's like holographic or like just a shiny hologram shirt. I don't remember, but still, like, hey. And she says that's the normal now. She wanted to be professional, casual professional is what she said, which makes Matthew fully believe that she's from the future. Like, he's talking to her, he's like, how can you talk to me through the computer right now? Why do you look like that? And she's like, yeah, that's what we do right now. He's like, oh, okay, so we're in the future. Okay, gotcha. In the beginning, having Matthew be a simulation, there's some pros that toys with the idea that Matthew is a construct of Essie's programming, but it does away with it soon. I wish that this could have been pushed a little bit more, but I think the things that are written about later are more important. It is what it is. There's a strange feeling that he's a simulation, but is experiencing it like he's alive. There's some discomfort there, but we move away from that. And so I think there's a slight pacing issue here because of that, but it is what it is. Like I joked about before, his acceptance of the future is pretty quick, and I feel like that's a pacing issue a little bit. But either way, it's a really cool idea to have Essie and Matthew agree to teach about communism through his simulation, like a sleeper agent. And also, like he's been asleep for nearly 70 years. Oh god, I'm thinking about this like it's set in 2014. I think it was like 2030 something that Essie lived in. So that's more than 70 years. Whatever. In a way, this story feels a little too optimistic, but I like how it creates a world that we want to see changed and then introduces that vehicle to change it. Matthew and Essie's book. It feels like the beginning of a larger story that doesn't need to be told, and I enjoy that, similarly to We Are the Cloud. There's also a cool reveal that Essie wasn't sure that he was a Soviet spy, sleeper agent, just that she had guessed it and let him confirm it on his own terms. And it makes their situation, creator and simulation, feel a lot more equal and more on the same level. This story feels very similar to Lois Lowry's The Giver, with a more technical twist. You know, guy who gives information about the past and how life should be lived to be spread out. But also, Ziranje Zhao's Iron Widow series, with a revolutionary, revolutionary in Qin Zhang. That's Qin Zhang right there. He's so hot. I love this man and hate him with all my heart. But I love this man. He's so hot. In the Iron Widow series, the second book, Heavenly Tyrant. Pull this bitch out. Ziranje Zhao, you own my heart. Heavenly Tyrant, Qin Zhang, returning from the past to fix the future. A labor movement. Love him. He's horrible. He's so hot. I just feel like having Lois Lowry's The Giver and Ziranje Zhao's Iron Widow in the same idea is really funny and appropriate here. This one's queer too. Lois Lowry's isn't. At position 9, it's a great upward swing to get us towards the midpoint. Because at this point, I would say some of the transitionary needs to be something special to be able to launch us to the next checkpoint, and then the next checkpoint, etc. You know what I mean? It's a great upward swing to get us to the midpoint. It just sucks that the midpoint is unfortunately the rapist story. Rest in peace, my guy. Number 8, Skullpocket by Nathan Ballingrud. Genre fantasy, original publication in Nightmare Carnival. Rating, setting 9, character 6, speculative 8, plot 7, style 8. Average rating 7.6 out of 10, position 15. This is a great, creepy story, but I don't have that much connection with it. It does a lot of things well, and I commend it for that. This is one of the examples of, well implementation. I don't quite enjoy it, but I have to commend how well it does implement the stuff that it wants to do. I feel like it's riding on the wave of Burtonesque stories, and I am wary of such stories, but this one does some things that make it stand out from those type of stories, which I do enjoy. All right, bear with me. It's about Hobbs Landing, a Chesapeake Bay town and home of Wormcake Mansion, where Mr. Jonathan Wormcake has lived for many years, watching over the tradition of the Skullpocket Fair, where children from Hobbs Landing are selected by the maggot and summoned in their dreams to learn about the history of their town. One of the first children chosen, now a priest of the Church of the Maggot, visits Mr. Wormcake and helps to prepare him for death. Yeah. I couldn't find a space for it from the script, so hey, off script. Skullpocket, the term. I don't know if it's real or not, if it's designed for or created for this story. It's a game where the monsters are playing I would say keep away or kickball around, but instead of a ball, it's a skull, and whoever breaks the skull and gets splashed by the brains loses, and then they're out, and then they keep playing with a different skull. That's Skullpocket. I don't know anything about sports. I don't know if there's real world forms of this game. If there's actual Skullpocket game. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. This story is mostly carried by its aesthetic and setting. Mostly carried. Wormcake Mansion, with its caretaker, Uncle Digby, which is a brain in the jar, who's very good with kids, I'll say. And the Church of the Maggot are great creations. A lot of aesthetic things. And also, we want to learn more about them. This story is formatted in 3 different points of view, switching back and forth with each other, not alternating, is sort of mixing in. Bear with me again. 1 is in the present, 2014, with Mr. Wormcake and the priest watching Uncle Digby tell a story to the newest group of kids in the Skullpocket Fair, 2014. 1 in the very far past, as Uncle Digby tells a story of three ghouls in 1914, including one of the 3 ghouls is Mr. Wormcake, visiting the Cold Water Fair in 2014, and 1 in the very near past of the beginning of the Skullpocket Fair in 1944, and of the priest's experience. He is the point of view character. I'd say Mr. Wormcake is the main character. The priest is the POV character. In the beginning of the Skullpocket Fair, his experience as a child there. So, 2014, 1914, 1944. All 3 stories interweave very organically, showing how the life cycle of the ghouls led to a massacre in 1914, and how the god of the ghouls, the maggot, chooses 14 kids, 1 for each kid killed in a massacre, to participate in a culling ritual, where, after Digby shares the story of the first, Cold Water Fair, the human kids, are released and made to run from monsters in an attempt to survive, and some of them will not. I think it's very smart to have this kind of aesthetic, the dark whimsy of Tim Burton, to lure us into a false sense of security, of familiarity, and then pull the rug under us and present something more dark than whimsical. The Church of the Maggot also feels specific and different, it being a religion that looks down on grief and waits for death with open arms. As a full package, we go into this story expecting one thing, something like Nightmare Before Christmas, and then ending with something way more horrifying and dark. And I really like that because it's sort of rejecting the Burton-esque whimsy of these types of stories. At a quarter position, number 15, it definitely stands out from the other stories, especially through its aesthetic. Number 15. I like horror, but I'm not a whimsy guy, and I can see how smartly it was written, so at least I can appreciate that. But yeah, I liked how well written this story was. I didn't quite enjoy the story, but it's really well written. So rip into pieces, my guy. Number 7, The One They Took Before by Kelly Sandoval. Genre fantasy, original publication in Shimmer magazine. Rating, setting 7, character 7, speculative 9, plot 8, style 8. Average rating 7.8 out of 10, position 18. This one took a bit for me to understand, but once I got it, it was amazing. It's pulling from traditions of fairy tales and stories of the Fae, and I have not consumed much very recently, and it was fun to revisit this type of story. It's about Kayla, who's been recently returned to the human realm after being trapped in the Fae realm. She peruses Craigslist ads, seeing other people affected by the Fae, and encounters a being that she knew in the year and a day that she was kept there. She struggles between living her mundane life and wanting to go back to the chaos of the Fae. A lot of these kinds of stories of humans encountering the Fae revolve around the interactions and the strange magic and all that. The biggest comparisons for me, unfortunately, are the Mortal Instruments and the Court of Thorns and Roses. I read those before a long time ago. I don't support that author anymore, and also Cassandra Clare weirds me out a bit, but I do want to reread the Infernal Devices series. But also, I just remembered, I could compare this to A Court of Fae and Flowers, the dropout Fae epistolary D&D game. Abria Iyengar loved this. Doesn't really delve into the themes that this story, the one they took before, deals with. But yes, A Court of Fae and Flowers. Every time I see Akatar for A Court of Thorns and Roses, I immediately replace that with Akafaf, A Court of Fae and Flowers. So highly recommend that instead of Akatar. Yeah. So like these Fae type stories deal with the interactions of such, but this one deals with the aftermath of a human encountering the Fae. The Fae realm is described here almost like a cosmic horror that's beautiful, and I really enjoy that. The Fae beings like to play with humans, and there are sections where Kayla reads the Craigslist ad, giving us glimpses into people's lives being affected by the Fae. A lot of it is hard to grasp and describe, which I like about this story. It's very cosmic horror-wise, and Kayla is left changed by the experience. Again, also pretty cosmic horror. She was only kept for a year and a day, but it felt like an eternity to her, and that is so terrifying. She uses the Craigslist ads to find out about a man killed by the Fae and goes to his funeral, and there she finds the Fae responsible. A horrifying moment where she asks, "What did this man do to you?" or "What did he do wrong?" And the Fae being just says, "He did nothing. I was bored of him, and that's why I killed him." Oh my god. She has this intense internal struggle to either go back to the Fae realm or stay here. It's sort of like this drug addiction that she's recovering from. Like, she had such high euphoria in the other realm that now that it's gone, nothing feels good or real. But she knows that she must be free. And there's a success in that despite the bad feeling. She knows how bad it was, and that is good. The Fae being that she encounters says that they have already kept her despite her being free, which is really sad because, yes, she cannot stop thinking about returning. However, when she's alone again, Fae being's gone, she resolves to wait for the people that she's seen taken by the Fae, wanting to help them. Again, pushing the connection to drug use and recovery. I like the message here, and while the aesthetic is also amazing, it does not overshadow the story. At position 18, right before Relive Box, another near drug abuse story, it gently brings us down to Relive Box's downer levels without making us feel horrible, without making us feel the whiplash of like some pretty good stories and all of a sudden the depression of the Relive Box. So it's really smart edit guiding us into the last, or second to last story. BRB, gonna go beat up Tinkerbell. Number 6, The Blue Afternoon That Lasted Forever by Daniel H. Wilson. Genre, science fiction, original publication in carbide-tipped pens. Rating, setting 6, character 9, speculative 9, plot 7, style 8. Average rating, 7.8 out of 10, position 14. Speaking of downer stories, this one is a doozy. Not many stories dare to go down this route and commit to this ending. A great combination of science and pathos. It's about a single-parent father who teaches his daughter, Marie, a lot of science as he's a physicist working for the government. He's not a perfect human, thinks in different ways, which drove his wife away, but is an amazing father to Marie, providing structure to their lives. One day at work, he notices a phenomenon in the sky and rushes home to be with Marie. This story wants you to cry. This story is gunning for you to cry. The beginning sets up Marie and her father's routine, how he puts her to sleep, how much he does for her. And he also begins noticing how she's beginning to grow up, as Marie, being 3 years old, begins to want to change small parts of their routine, as children do. Marie growing up and changing scares her father, but he accepts that it is inevitable. A lot of work is done in a relatively short amount of time to endear the father and Marie to the audience, to us, and it pays off really well. The phenomena he sees is some extremely specific and scientific astronomic event caused by gravity and photons and other astronomic cosmic things that I cannot understand. But basically, a tiny black hole is approaching Earth. When he runs and takes Marie, they hunker down in their bathroom and he tries to keep her calm, and the world around them begins to fall apart. And there's a moment he calculates how many people would have died by this time. Like, okay, dude. Okay. He straps himself and Marie to a pipe and he uses the same structured routine that was set up in the beginning to help calm her. In the end, the entire world is eaten by the black hole, and he and Marie die in each other's arms. So fun. It's an incredibly emotional ending, with no hope, but filled with love. And the story is short, at least, so we don't really dwell that much on Marie and father. We care about them a lot, but we don't spend that much time with them, so it doesn't feel so horrible when they do die. If it was a bit longer and we spent a lot more time knowing about these characters, caring about these characters, then it actually hurt a lot more when they do die in the end, because we expect them in a way, because we spend a lot of time with them, to survive. But because we don't, they die. It's so sad. It's so sad, but we're not like overtly horribly feeling because of that. The story wants to make you cry. I don't think it succeeds that well in it. Other stories do, which we will talk about. But I do like the attempt. And yeah, the world ends. Wilson commits to this ending, which I commend. It's both a cool showcase of hard science fiction with the black holes, a what-if kind of story, and it's a combination of that, and a beautiful story about parenting and growing up. In the contributor's notes, Daniel H. Wilson says that the black hole represents the inability to let go of your loved ones, of there being no change. Thus, the blue afternoon that lasts forever does not change. Very bad. Wilson has written a lot of hard science fiction, as well as a sequel to Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain. Michael Crichton wrote The Andromeda Strain, and Wilson wrote the sequel, The Andromeda Evolution. I'm not sure if I'll read that, because I didn't really connect it to the story. If that book improves on the characters, then I'll read it. I have to look into that. Wilson's style of writing, mixing in emotion with hard science, does remind me of Michael Crichton as well, but this story, I apologize if I mispronounce the name, reminds me of Cixin Liu's The Three-Body Problem. It also has some astronomic forces that is the three-body problem, but also mixes in a great pathos with the characters. I would like to watch the show, but it's on Netflix. I don't have that. But I heard it's good. Anyways, in position 14, which leads into Skullpocket, it marks the beginning of the end of the anthology in a fun way. Because, one, third quarter, position 15, So that's the beginning of the end. And also 2, the world ends and then is reborn into Skullpocket, metaphorically at least. BRB, gonna go hug my daughter. Number 5, Windows by Susan Palwick. Genre, science fiction. Original publication in Asimov's science fiction. Rating, setting 8, character 9, speculative 8, plot 7, style 8. Average rating, 8 out of 10. Position 11. As we get into the top 5, these will be the ones that I remember most from this book. These next 5 stories have a special place in my heart and in my memory. Susan Palwick's Sparrows in the 2023 volume is a standout post-apocalypse story. This one, Windows, this one snuck up on me in a very surprising way. This is about Vanjie. Miss Vanjie. Vanjie is a mother on a bus headed towards a prison to see her son, Graham, for his birthday. She wants to show him a flash drive with a recording of his sister, her daughter Zell, wishing him a happy birthday that she recorded while on a spaceship headed into space to the first settler colony at a distant planet. This is a very quick story. The very beginning has Vanjie narrating her bus ride, her worries about the prison. She thinks about and remembers moments in the past where things have gone wrong, such as, obviously, Graham getting arrested for selling drugs, or past visits to the prison that things have not exactly gone right. A lot of emotion is packed into the first few paragraphs to portray Vanjie as a lower-class, disenfranchised woman facing the harsh world around her. We also learned that her daughter Zell won a lottery to be one of the first people to traverse space and settle on a far-off planet similar to Earth. This is a very common science fiction story of settlers headed towards an unknown future for the hope of humanity. Nolan's Interstellar, obviously, one we've all heard of. One that I recently read, Tammy O's Do You Dream of Terror 2? Pretty fine YA novel, science fiction. I like the ideas here, and more in the recent zeitgeist, Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, which is, they're going to another planet. However, Windows flips the trope on its head by having it set in the point of view of someone left behind. Vanjie has a lot of anxieties that worries her, which brings us the title of the story. She sees Zell excited for this mission, but she knows that she'll die in the spaceship of natural causes or of age, and only her children's children will see the new world that they are headed to settle. She compares the freedom and future of Zell to Graham, imprisoned and not free. But the thing that they do have in common are windows to the outside, and outside they cannot reach. Zell would die in the vacuum of space, and Graham is in jail. Vanjie's thoughts help establish a despondent but optimistic tone. With as much anxiety Vanjie has just for the trip, she's still glad that she can visit Graham. With how the spaceship travels, it's almost by sheer luck that Zell's message is sent before Graham's birthday, and his birthday lands on a visitation day. Vanjie sees all this as good luck. As she's approaching, she continues to have this streak of good luck, making her visit to Graham easier. And we can feel her holding reluctant relief, trying not to get her hopes up. But everything moves smoothly for her to deliver Zell's message. However, when she arrives and sees Graham, he's brought a chaplain with him, which confuses Vanjie. In a twisted moment of irony, it seems like her good luck has run out, because she gets news that there was a fire and an explosion on Zell's ship, and Earth has not heard from them since. Again, Vanjie begins to overthink and grow anxious, and she sends the chaplain away after they pray for Zell's safety. This is a repeated pattern of behavior we've seen from her, but this time she maintains a forced optimism, a show of strength and resilience within her. We feel her worry, and we understand why she holds back her fear. Things have gone so well, let's not ruin that, is what she's feeling. Graham wants to talk about Zell, but Vanjie won't let it, and she plays him Zell's birthday message, where they learn she's gotten pregnant. It's a very quick video, but enough, because all around Vanjie, other people are watching the video as well. They are all afraid for the settlers. I'll read to you how it ends. The message ends. The room's quieter than Vanjie's ever heard it. She feels the pressure at her back and turns to find a crowd around the table. Other inmates and visitors, other guards. The guy who manned the metal detector, the woman at the desk, the chaplain. Some of them are sniffling. They look stricken. They look alike, whatever they're wearing, uniforms or prison jumpsuits or street clothing. They heard the music. They came to watch the message from the ship. It's so tragic and so beautiful. It reminds me of the scene in Children of Men, but with an opposite feeling, a negative feeling. In Children of Men, soldiers fighting insurgents are brought to a standstill by the cries of the first baby born in 20 years, and they look to them with hope for the future. Here, the cold prison guards and visitors are silenced and watch with sadness at probably the last known message from the settlers before the accident, and they look to them with fear for the future. And yet, Vanjie holds on to hope still, and says that they don't know anything for sure. No news of good news. And that's true. All the signs show that something happened, but there has not been any confirmation. Maybe there will never be. But Vanjie wants to focus on the now to avoid this fear and makes the room sing happy birthday to Graham. The stories I mentioned before, Interstellar, Terra 2, Making 17, so much focus is placed on the people leaving than the people left behind. But here in Windows, we get a microcosm of the effects of the events that we would see in these kinds of stories. This story is sincere and emotional and allows us to draw our own conclusions, whether to pity Vanjie or hope along with her. In contrast to, say, Fruits of Hawaii, the story has this ambiguity to allow us to choose either side. Like I said, it snuck up on me, especially with how anxious Vanjie is, setting an expectation and a sad tone that is eventually overshadowed by Vanjie's hope. At position 11, it follows the unfortunate midpoint, but because of that, it sets off the latter half of this book, managing to grab your heart quickly and efficiently. And I love that so much. I almost nearly cried at this story. I'd say the next few stories that I talk about, Blue Afternoon tried to make me cry, didn't succeed, but I almost got there. This one, I almost cried at. And then the next one, BRB, gonna go cry in the corner.
Angie.
Number 4, Tortoiseshell Cats Are Not Refundable by Cat Rambo. Genre, science fiction. Original publication, Clark's World Magazine. Rating, setting 6, character 8, speculative 9, plot 9, style 8. Average rating, 8 out of 10. Position 3. Okay, so, crying, right? Similar to Windows, this one also snuck up on me and almost made me cry in a different sort of way. There's something about stories that know exactly how to end, that have exactly the right sentence to get you to sob. And I love these kinds of stories. Tortoiseshell is about Anthony, whose girlfriend Mindy died in a boating accident, and he uses the cloning technology to bring her back to life, but discovers something is off. This sounds creepy, and true, it does. These kinds of stories can lead to horror, such as Pet Sematary and Reanimator. There are other sci-fi stories as well that don't really treat this in a horror way, such as Black Mirror's Be Right Back, directed by Owen Harris. Elliot Schrafer's The Darkness Outside Us. Interesting. Cloning. Secret cloning. Spoiler alert. I'm going to spoil this book. They're all clones of each other. They're all gay for each other, and they're all clones for each other. Oh no. There's some really good cosmic horror, but it suffers from YA writing. And even Star Wars. All those stories really deal with the ethics of cloning. This story, Tortoiseshell, decides to be more optimistic. Anthony's mother had also dealt with grief, and to help her, Anthony had bought her a tortoiseshell cat. When it died, he found a kit that helped him clone another cat for her, but when he gave it to her, she saw that it was a different fur pattern than before. When he talks with the company that sold him this technology, he's told the title, Tortoiseshell Cats Are Not Refundable, and the company says that the DNA is unpredictable. The idea of the unpredictability of DNA is further explored when Anthony is approached to clone Mindy. Within the story, another sci-fi element is the shunt, which, yes, is the same name as the shunt in Fruits of the Vampire, but here, it's a device that helps you record, remember, and connect to the internet. It's an element that really doesn't get explored that much, but I like how it feels entrenched in the world. The shunt isn't part of the central conflict, it's just a feature. In the process of preparing to clone Mindy, the company he's paying uses items in their room and his own memories to reconstruct her own memories, which feels similar to Michael Gondry's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, another sci-fi movie set in very real modern times. In that movie, they use items. I recently watched the movie, so I remember a lot more, but in that movie, they use items and Joel's emotions to map his memory of Clementine to erase her from his memory, a reverse, sort of what they are doing for Anthony and Mindy. Eternal Sunshine, erasing from memory, Tortoiseshell Cats, reconstructing memory. You know, Tortoiseshell Cats, Eternal Sunshine, really interesting sci-fi because it's sort of like this low sci-fi, I would say. Yeah, low sci-fi, set in a very real modern world with like just a little splash of sci-fi elements, compared also to Kel Coleman's Delete Your First Memory for Free of the 2022 volume. These three set in very modern times and have some somewhat optimistic views on science fiction technology. I'd say that Eternal Sunshine is a little bit more pessimistic, but these two, I was really impressed with how optimistic they looked at technology. When they clone Mindy, he's told to lie to her for at least 6 months that she's a clone, and to tell her that she was in an accident and has been in a coma. He begins noticing how she begins to act a bit differently, just slightly, just like an inch or two to the right, different. And when he asks the doctor, the conversation around turtleshell cats returns. Turtleshell cats are not refundable. DNA is unpredictable. He begins to think about his mistake, knowing that the cloning may have generated a slightly different Mindy because genetics is still not wholly understood. That's also an aspect with Eternal Sunshine, Tortoiseshell Cats, and Delete Your First Memory. They're toying with technology that they don't fully understand, and there are consequences to that. Some consequences bigger than others. Now, usually in these kinds of stories, there would be some element of conflict between the cloner and the cloned, like arguments of self-ownership and one's purpose in life. Some resurrection stories have them come back wrong in a horrifying way, or at least question, hey, I died, why did you bring me back to life? But Rambo decides to look at it a lot more realistically, and I really like that. Alongside Anthony and Mindy's story is Anthony's mother's story, which is the standout moment for me. Her first cat was named Taco Cat, a palindrome, and when she gets the new cat, she doesn't know how to feel about it because its pattern is different. It's sort of like a different cat. She calls it Taco 2, not a palindrome, and loaned it to one of her neighbors briefly to deal with mice, quote unquote, and Anthony begins to think that it is a permanent thing. Like she's just sort of like hiding that she gave it away. His mother's rejection of Taco 2, which occurs before Mindy's cloning, makes Andy anxious for the cloning because he sees a potential future where she's also wrong, like Taco 2. He doesn't realize that it makes him feel that way, only feeling bad that he got it wrong. Like it's a subconscious level that he's like anxious about Mindy's cloning because of his mother. After Mindy's cloned and he picks her up and sees that she's wrong, she's different, he goes to his mother again and finds her petting the new cat. He tells her the issue with Mindy and she empathizes with him. Then this is how the story ends. His mother smoothed her hand over the cat, whispered to it. What's that? He said, asking her what she makes of this. But you called her something. She blushed. Taco Tutu Cat. Not Taco, but Taco 2. Not and yet and still. Like his Mindy, who he could finally grieve for, who he could finally meet for the first time. Are you going to pretend? His mother said. No, he said. I'm going to tell her, and tell her why she feels about me like she does. Then she can decide. Decide whether or not to keep things as they were? No. Decide whether or not to begin. Anthony sees his mother attempt to try again, and to connect with her cat, who is not her cat but is her cat, as signaled by giving it a palindrome name. And this makes him decide that it has to be a mutual decision. And then the story ends just as he says that. And also an interesting part of the edit of the book, I guess, is that the last line is at the very bottom of the page, and then I flip the page over, expecting more, and then there's the next story. Really impactful there. I think that's a beautiful and nuanced way to end this story, with the conflict unresolved, but with a future that isn't bad. He and Mindy will decide to begin again or not, and what has been done is done, and whatever happens, it will be for the best. I think that's a great message and change in the trope, one that's unexpected and also heart-wrenching. Like I said, I turned the page. I want to continue living with Anthony, his mother, Mindy, Taco Tutu Cat, and I don't get to do that. But they do. They get to continue living with each other, and I think that's beautiful. As an introductory story, position 3, I think it's a great selection at this point, a story that sets the standard for the emotion that we'll get later in the book. This story got the closest for me to cry. So, Blue Afternoon, no tears. Windows, close to tears. This one, when I turned that page, gone, no more story, next story. Oh my god. I was at work reading that for the first time. I was at work reading that, and I turned the page and I'm like, oh my god. And I almost nearly cried. So, kudos to you. I still don't like cats though. Number 3, The Thing About Shapes to Come by Adam Troy Castro. Genre, science fiction, original publication in Lightspeed magazine. Rating, setting 7, character 8, speculative 10, plot 7, style 8. Average rating, 8 out of 10, position 12. There's a trend for these top 5 of very surprising stories. Adam Troy Castro's Pitcher Plant in the 19 volume was hard to understand, but his Sacred Spod in the 2020 volume was so powerfully angry. This story, Shapes, is exceptionally wacky, and yet it still feels sincere. I would guess that this is a story that most people would remember from this anthology when they read it. It's about a young mother, Monica, whose baby is born as a cube. For over 2 decades, the majority of babies are born as shapes, either cubes or spheres or pyramids. They grow in size over the years, and the world does not know how to deal with them. At position 12, it comes out of nowhere, being a very imaginative and original story. It hits like a hammer how absurd it is, especially following Windows, with how emotional it is and how kind of down to earth it is. The tonal whiplash is crazy. But thankfully, it maintains a strong emotional depth within it that doesn't make the transition between Windows and here so bad. You know, there is difference in how grounded realistic Windows is and then the absurdity of this one, but they're both very emotional, and so it sort of bridges that gap pretty well. I am very happy that Castro decides to pair this absurdist concept with a strong emotional core of Monica, who names her square daughter Di. This is how the story begins. Monica's new baby was like a lot of new babies these days in that she was born a cube. She had no external or internal sexual organs, or for that matter organs of any kind, being just a warm solid filled with protoplasm. But she was, genetically at least, a girl, and one who had resembled her mother as much as any cube possibly could. That wasn't much, in that she had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no chin, no hair, nothing that could be charitably called a face or bodily features, not even any orifices larger than pores. But she had inherited Monica's healthy appetite. Placed in a dish in a puddle of Monica's breast milk, she throbbed in deep appreciation and absorbed it all in a matter of minutes, becoming as plump and as satiated as a sponge. As far as anybody could tell, she was a happy and healthy cube. Great setting of tone here. Monica's own parents struggle with this baby cube, at one point calling Di a parasite and using it pronouns. Monica continues to use she/her pronouns. Monica defended her position to parent Di with the idea that the only difference between the shapes and real babies is that babies make noise and demand attention. Otherwise, they still ate and they still grew. And with the shapes, you don't have to change any diapers either. I think there's some hidden commentary here on raising children with disabilities, as some people regard raising disabled children as a waste of time and resources. Monica insists on raising Dai, and it's a strong message about love and devotion. The absurdity of the shape babies are pushed to the extremes, and I enjoy learning about how other parents cope with them, some of them putting clothes on the shape and drawing a smiley face on them. I felt like this was also a critique on parents controlling their child if they were neurodivergent or disabled or just different in any way, sort of forcing children to mask who they actually are. At one point, Monica's parents convince her to tour a facility that houses shapes. It was nearly inhumane how the shapes fit into racks, how the documentation of which shape belongs to which parent is an unstable mess, and how packed in they are. Again, this feels like a critique on school systems and how a child can be left behind by systems made to help it. I don't think Castro wrote this story with the idea of writing these critiques, but there is critique to pull from in these concepts. The climax of the absurdity I do not quite enjoy. It is the time that the spheres rebelled. None of the shape babies can communicate with humans, and most can't move because of their flat bottoms, but spheres are unique because they seem to have their own autonomous movement. The spheres seem to rebel against their treatment, but then this ends with a whimper as the spheres seem to stop moving. A great, a noble event has just happened, and then it just ends. Like, cool, great. What does this all do? What does this all mean? The climax doesn't really affect the story, which is, to me, is Monica and Dai's situation. Doesn't really affect anything, but it's fun at least, I'd say. 9 months later, the last shape baby is born, and babies return to being humanoid, with no explanation given. I think it's really smart not to give an explanation. There's no reason, there's no why, there's no result either, just that it happened and then it stopped. I struggle knowing what this genre is here because it feels like science fiction in its framing, but develops more as a fantasy. It's definitely an absurdist fiction story, and I labeled it as fantasy because that would make the anthology exactly 10 and 10, and I'm not sure if other stories have a more ambiguous genre to replace, so fantasy it is, just to make it even. The end of the story has Monica visiting a town when she's much older, and she's left Dai in a farm where she's grown to the size of a building. Monica still sees Dai as an individual person in spite of what the world may see these shape babies, shape people as. This farm is similar to a retirement home with other old shapes protected and watched over. When Monica's there, a doorway opens up on a side of Dai, and Monica steps in, and the story ends. I feel like this ending is too ambiguous, but it matches the absurdist feel. I don't even think Castro even knows why a door opened or what Monica finds in there, and there are very little clues as to the nature of it, but because of how absurdist it's been, because of how sincere it's been, anything we imagine Monica sees in there is good and beautiful. I can't even compare this story to anything I've read. Shapes like these bring to mind Flatland by Edwin Abbott, but I have not read that, so can't really compare that. And just all the stories in this anthology are very imaginative, but this story just has a different feel to it. A great standout story. Wear protection, y'all. Wrap your willy. Number 2, Cimmeria, from the Journal of Imaginary Anthropology by Theodora Goss. Genre, fantasy, original publication in Lightspeed magazine, rating, setting 9, character 6, speculative 9, plot 9, style 8. Average rating 8.2 out of 10, position 8. I have to be very honest. This story was number 1. However, compared with the current number 1, and adjusting some numbers, I had to bring it down as a runner-up. And also, I have to compare it to Theodora Goss's other work, and it doesn't quite reach those highs. But, wow, is this premise fun. It's about Patrick, a student in Southern Arizona State. He, Lisa, and Mark took Dr. Farrow's class AN 703, Contemporary Anthropological Theory, where they worked together to create a fictional world of Cimmeria. Through their work of fleshing out this imaginary country, it all of a sudden becomes real, situated within Eastern Europe. I enjoy this premise so much because it mixes history, fantasy, drama, world building, sociology, politics, anthropology, a bunch of other things in a really cool way. This concept that a group of people can create an imaginary country and then it actually becomes real is so fun to me. I love this idea so much. There's the base idea, base level thinking of, maybe Middle Earth can come to life, or maybe the world that I create can come to life. And then there's the second, smarter thinking of, oh, this could cause a lot of problems. And Goss explores that in this story. I also have to compare this story to Goss's Pelargonia, a letter to the Journal of Imaginary Anthropology in the 2023 volume. Probably one of the top stories in this anthology. Pelargonia is also about three people, kids, high schoolers this time, who make up a country for fun, Pelargonia, and have to deal with its repercussions. While Cimmeria is delivered in prose, Pelargonia changes the form a bit, with it being a letter, with each student interjecting into the writing in fun and entertaining ways. Pelargonia's characters and style are better than Cimmeria's, in my opinion, and I just cannot place this story at the top of this list if a similar story outranks it in an overall sense. It just doesn't feel fair. Both Cimmeria and Pelargonia dive into the politics of a suddenly real country with a full documented history, as well as exploring the culture that they have created. They both have different ways to go about it, but each are able to create a great story out of it in their own separate ways. In fact, I believe that Cimmeria's plot is a lot better than Pelargonia's, but Pelargonia does a lot of things better. We'll talk about Pelargonia eventually. A lot of the imaginative moments create a country's cultures and traditions, and they are showcased as Patrick, Lisa, and Mark visit the country. Most of it is in Patrick's POV, though. They are basically experts on the country. Based on the history they created, they discover how Cimmeria had continued past their writing with a sudden civil war brewing from the seeds that they have planted. There's also a showcase of the risk of world building, how one thing that you create that sounds really cool can lead to an unforeseen consequence. When they first met the Khan, the leader of Cimmeria, he presented them his 4 girls, but only names 3. And we learn this. Cimmerians don't recognize twins, said Lisa. That has to be the explanation. Do you remember the 13th century philosopher Farkush Kursand? When God made the world, he decreed that human beings would be born one at a time, unique, unlike animals. They would be born defenseless, without claws or teeth or fur. But they would have souls. It's in a children's book. I have a copy somewhere, but it's based on Kursand's reading of Genesis in one of his philosophical treatises. Mike would know which. And it's the basis of Cimmerian human rights law, actually. That's why women have always had more rights here. They have souls, so they've been allowed to vote since Cimmeria became a parliamentary monarchy. I'm sure it's mentioned in one of the articles, I don't remember which one, but check the database Mike has been putting together. Shayla must have been a twin, and the Cimmerians don't recognize the second child as separate from the first. So, Shayla is one girl, in 2 bodies, but with 1 soul. Who came up with that stupid idea? Well, to be perfectly honest, it might have been you. It's an unsettling way to showcase how someone's idea could expand into oppressing a group of people, how some rhetoric can be organically twisted to hurt others. As Cimmeria's civil unrest grows, Pat agrees to marry Shayla so that she can be away from the bloodshed in her country. But that also means her shadow follows her. Again, compared to Pelargonia, I don't exactly like how the rest of the story takes place back in the States. It's a lot of fun exploring different countries' norms and culture, but then we narrow into Pat and Shayla's life. Pelargonia stays in Pelargonia, and I enjoy that more than having to focus on Pat, who I am uninterested in as well. However, how the story progresses from pulling away from Cimmeria itself into Cimmerian culture, and then even further into Shayla's situation is still interesting. It pushes the consequences of haphazard world building even further. A lot of time is spent with Pat trying to live with Shayla and her shadow, whom she does not ever acknowledge. This makes him uneasy but afraid to do anything because it's someone's culture, no matter how imagined it was or not. One night, there's news that the Khan's son, Shayla's brother Malik, was assassinated, which elevates Shayla into the next in line of succession. Pat returns and finds that Shayla's twin has replaced her, killing and making Shayla disappear, and he's the only one who knows besides his mother. It's heavily implied that the twin killed her so that she would be elevated as the next canon of Cimmeria in place of Shayla. This moment is so cool because now it's become a quick political thriller, feeling very Game of Thrones, feeling very The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. Amazing, amazing political thriller. I need to keep reading this. Warrior Cats, according to my boyfriend. I don't know, I've not watched it. He wanted me to mention Warrior Cats. Now, all of a sudden, Pat has been elevated to a position of power as the husband of the canon-to-be. All throughout, Pat is telling this story as an article to the Journal of Imaginary Anthropology, and he begins to contemplate how he had created this country, and now the country is changing him in some sort of twist in fate. I think it'd be really cool to see this idea pushed further in a larger story with Pat and the other students using their creator knowledge of Cimmeria to do a political intrigue, perhaps dealing with Shayla's twin. I adore how much happens because of a group of students' imagination. And while I hold Pelagonia at a higher view, Cimmeria does what it wants to do very, very well. Cimmeria, the country itself, is described in amazing detail, and the implications of this fantastical element can be stretched to many directions, which I adore. At position 8, a transitory piece that doesn't draw attention to itself, situated between Ogres and its challenging form, and Sleeper with its sci-fi near future, Cimmeria manages to stand out amazingly. It just doesn't compare to Pelagonia. Say it with me now, basic straight men bore me. Get some therapy! Number 1. How to Become a Robot in 12 Easy Steps by A. Merc Rustad. Genre science fiction, original publication in Scientasy. Rating setting 8, character 9, speculative 9, plot 8, style 10. Average rating 8.8 out of 10, position 20. This is an amazing story to finish off this anthology. Not only for this ranking, but also it being the last story of the book. I'm sure that I would enjoy the story as much as I do if it was in the middle of the book, but having it as a send-off is a great way to end this book. Most ending stories have to do something special, and I think this story does it. It's about Tesla, a neurodivergent woman with depression who falls in love with a robot server in her local coffee shop. When she discovers it's been replaced, she fishes it out of the dump and focuses on reconstructing it, hoping that it can make her feel whole. There's a really cute romance hidden underneath the messy thoughts of Tesla. Every few paragraphs, she begins to list things, numbered or bulleted lists for her internal thoughts. It's how she's able to make sense of the world and plan what she wants to do. In this world, robots are made for the service industry to help customers, and Tesla has fallen in love with J90 SRM because of how structured, calm, and not human it is. She can relate to the robot more than she can relate to her boyfriend, Jonathan. This also brings in another funny aspect. Jonathan and Tesla have a secret fake relationship, as he's gay and his parents don't really approve of that, and she struggles with making connections with people because she's very robotic. Their arrangement works well for them until Jonathan meets Bernardo, and they begin dating. Now, Tesla's world begins to shrink around her as she struggles to understand how to be a human. And when she learns J90 SRM was replaced, her immediate reaction is to save it and try to fix the robot. Jonathan and Bernardo help rescue it, and she begins working on the robot. The prose sticks very closely with Tesla, at times breaking into lists to formulate her thoughts, which shows her thought process and how she organizes her world. As the idea of bringing J90 SRM back to life becomes less and less possible, Tesla's mind begins to fracture and strain under the stress. She begins to have subroutine lists, lists under lists to keep track of it all, and she also knows that she's depressed. This is one important list. How to tell your pretend boyfriend and his real boyfriend that your internal processors are failing. 1. The biological term is depression, but you don't have an official diagnosis, and it's a hard word to say. It feels heavy and stings your mouth, like when you tried to eat a battery when you were small and your parents got upset. 2. Instead, you try to hide the feeling, but the dark stain has already spilled across your hard wiring and clogged your processor. You don't have access to any working help files to fix this. Tech support is unavailable for your model. No extended warranty exists. 3. Pretend the reason you have no energy is because you're sick with a generic bug. 4. You have time to sleep. Your job is canceling out many of your functions. Robots can perform cleaning and maintenance in hotels for a much better wage investment. And since you are not yet a robot, you know you will be replaced soon. 5. The literal translation of the word depression. You are broken and devalued and have no further use. 6. No one refurbishes broken robots. 7. Please self-terminate. When her life becomes harder to manage, more subroutine lists appear, and it feels very similar to a machine attempting different pathways to respond to a virus or a malfunction. She already feels more robot than human through the prose. Tesla eventually uses her project of J90 SRM to keep herself alive, and Jonathan Bernardo help as well. Also, she holds out hope that the technology will be present in the future to make her into a robot. In the beginning, it's so tragic to see this woman struggle with connection, yet it's amazing that it's connection with other people and to the robot that helps save her in the end. Tesla is able to reconstruct J90 SRM, and it talks to her, thanking her for saving its life. This is distinct from its prior interactions and adds a bit of romance to the story. I really like robot romance stories, but I've not read that much good ones. Not going to name names, but there's been some real stinkers. Recently, I read The Death I Gave Him by M.X. Liu, a Hamlet retelling with the Hamlet character falling in love with the Horatio character, who is also an AI. I need to have this physically. I got it from the library. I loved this book so much. In The Death I Gave Him, not fully robot, but enough for me for what I want to, at least. When Tesla and J90 SRM talk, she asks if it is possible for her to become a robot and gives out ideas of how to accomplish it, including sticking her finger into a socket. But the robot tells her it's too dangerous right now and that it will be sad if she dies. Then it asks to have the chance to understand her better, which is exactly what she wanted, for people to understand her better. It ends with Tesla asking for what to call the robot and one last list. How to become a robot. 1. You don't. 2. Not yet. 3. But you will. The details of this story, how Tesla sees the world and how, in reality, she's not totally alone, is absolutely beautiful. This story does so much, with the showcase of Tesla's mind, the robot romance that will continue, great supporting characters in Jonathan Bernardo, and the optimism of the future. In a way, this optimism for Tesla's future extends to the optimism of our future. Like I said, in terms of the edit, this story following Relive Box, which follows the one they took before, 2 stories with like downer endings, getting us to 12 easy steps, a struggle of Tesla's mind, of being a person and not a person at the same time, and then launching us straight up into the stratosphere of amazing emotion, ending the anthology itself. Oh, it's so good. It's so amazing. This edit is real good. This book is so good. I just love it so much. This is why this is number 1 for me. So, post-anthology analysis. Now we get into some stats. Taking all 20 stories and looking at their parameters, objective numbers to describe my own personal subjective opinions, we get some interesting data. I've taken the parameters and found the average score for all 5 parameters in this book. The average setting is a 7.15. The average character is a 6.7. The average speculative element is a 7.7. The average plot is a 6.5. And the average style, 6.95. This shows that the speculative elements are the standouts for this speculative anthology. Go figure. Taking all 20 stories and averaging their score, I find that the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy of 2015 has a score of 7 out of 10. It's an exact score of 7, which I found really fun because, there should be decimals in this score, but no, it's an exact 7, which is really fun. The more I go through this series, I will begin to compare and eventually rank all of the books together as a collection. Come out. All of these and the more will be compared against each other with their ranking. This one right now is a 7. I'm pretty sure some of these will be lower and some of these will be higher. And that sounds like a lot of fun for me. For these anthologies, I try to find a common thread or a common motif within the unconnected stories that makes the guest editor choose them. Here, it feels like Joe Hill is looking for surprising stories, the ones about people we don't usually think of and of hope for the future. Overall, this collection feels like a look forward into the world's future with hope and fear. So many of these stories also deal with current issues, but packaged around a fantasy or science fiction element that further places these issues in stark detail. The authors writing these stories want us to face these issues head on with the knowledge of what could be. Personally, I think this is a fine collection. I've read better, I've read worse. And it's a great beginning volume for this series and definitely brings anticipation for the next volume. 2016 volume will be next. It's right over here. Let's reveal it, shall we? Ooh, it's gray. So look out for that one in the future. There are a handful of single author collections that I want to touch on as well. Like I said, Carmen Maria Machado, Ted Chiang, both of his anthologies are really good. The Thing Around Your Neck, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, also really good. Also want to touch on different anthologies. Ellen Datlow's The Best Horror of the Year. So good. So good. And I bought volume 8, which I will get to eventually. I might alternate that, who knows. So, thank you so much for watching if you got to this point, if you got this far. Let me know if you've either heard/read of any of these stories, heard/read of any of these authors, or if you've read one of the best American anthologies as well. Like I said, these are my own opinions, and I'd love to know what y'all think about these stories, how y'all may differ in your opinions. Tell me in the comments how, in your opinion, one story deserved a higher or lower ranking than I gave it, and why. I was showing my boyfriend the setup, and I remembered that I forgot to show y'all. This is the books that I had set aside. I forgot to got this is Darkness Outside Us. I forgot to put that out when I put these out. But yeah, easy grab here so I can talk about it. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends. I'd love to hear some feedback from y'all about my channel and my videos. So yeah, look out for other anthology videos and also entity exploration videos. I'm still working on that. Shout out to Magnus Archives fans who have stuck with me. Thank you. I'm also going to start working on another book that changed me, a bigger project, and also obviously monthly recaps of the books that I read, etc. Thank you again so much for watching. I appreciate you so much for going on this journey with me and sharing this anthology with me. Don't be afraid to be passionate, and I'll see you later.